Color grading in DaVinci Resolve can seem a little bit intimidating when you first get into it, but I promise you, if you do copy this simple node tree that I've created, things will become so much more simpler and a lot easier when you do color grade your shots. So first, let's talk about nodes and what's actually so good about them. Why can't you just do all of your color grading on one node? Well, you can do that. You can simply add your conversion LUT to Rec 709. There's my conversion LUT straight onto the actual clip, and you can go down here to the primary color wheels and you can start editing your footage. You want to add some saturation here, and then maybe you want to add a little bit of warmth to the highlights, and then you want to add a little bit of blue to the shadows, for example. Why can't you do that? Well, you can do that, like I said. The reason why nodes are so good is because if you want to see what the color grade is actually looking like, or if you've actually gone in here to the curves and you want to add a little bit of lift to the shadows down here to bring down, just to make that a little bit of a faded look, how can you actually see what that is actually doing to the image without affecting the rest of your grades? Well, if you color grade on just one node, you can't see that. That's why nodes are so good, because you can turn off each individual node and you can actually see what that node is doing to the image without affecting everything else. If I actually reset this node grade now, what we want to do is, I actually don't really use a lot of LUTs. I like to convert the footage myself using the color space transform. So what I like to do, I like to press Option S and I create 4 nodes, and I grab my color space transform from the effects, bring that over to the first node. And then basically, because this was shot on the Canon R6 Mark III, I'm going to be using up here the input color space. I'll be using Canon Cinema Gamut, and then the input gamma will be Canon C-Log 2, because I shot this in C-Log 2. And now this is going straight into my output color space, which I'll show you now if you go into the settings. And my output color space is use timeline, because I've got that set up as Rec 709A for both of them. And it's really important if you're using a Mac, is it has to be Rec 709A. And basically, if you don't have it as A when you do export your image or your videos, it will be completely washed out and it won't be what you see in the color grade. So that's what I normally have. However, in this first node, I don't use timeline. I actually go in here and I change it to DaVinci Wide Gamut, and then I actually change it down here to DaVinci Intermediate. All I have to do then is, once I'm in this, I can press Option on my keyboard and then drag that over to copy it onto the 4th grade. I click onto the 4th grade and then I literally click swap, and then I reset the output color space and the output gamma to use timeline, and the nodes in between them is where we're going to be editing our footage, because it makes such a big difference if you actually color grade and color correct your footage before applying it to Rec 709. Because if you applied a LUT like I did on the first node earlier, then create a new node after, you lose all of your dynamic range. That's why it's so important to do all of your adjustments before you put it into Rec 709, because before that, you're actually working in the log color space rather than working in the Rec 709 color space where all that dynamic range goes. I hope that makes sense and I hope you're following along. I'm going to right click and I'm going to label this node exposure. So the second node is literally, I go over to the primary color wheels at the bottom and I mess around with the lift, gamma, gain, and sometimes the offset, highlights, and my shadows down here. I don't really touch the contrast, sometimes I do, but like I said, for a quick and easy color grade, I like to normally bring down the lift, just to add that nice contrast, add them blacks in. Sometimes, obviously, you've got a massive sun flare in this one, which I don't mind, it's overexposed. Sometimes I like to bring that out even more by bringing up the gain, just to make it pop a little bit more. But I like to bring down the highlights just a tad, sometimes a little bit too much, which you can actually see a little bit more detail in the sky there. So sometimes I do like to go down, but not too much. And I might bring up the gain a little bit more, let's say. And the gamma is like the midtones. So sometimes if I really want to get that nice contrasty look, I bring them down. But sometimes if it's a little bit too dark, I like to bring the gamma up, but keep the lift down. So let's just do this for now. So this is the exposure, that's before, that's after. I like how this is looking. Let's say I want to move on to the next clip, which is the 3rd node, and I'm going to rename this is my grade. Normally what I like to do sometimes, let's say I go down into the saturation, I either go like 55, maybe 60, that's probably a little bit too much. So let's just stick to 55. And then this is where, again, I'll stay in the color wheel section. And this is where I'll play around with the actual color wheels this time. So let's say I want to make the shadows, because this was in the morning, I want to make the shadows maybe quite bluey, because it was still, as you can see, it's snowy in this area here, and I wanted to make it quite blue, but I want to make the highlights where the sun's coming from really nice and warm and orange. So let's try and find a nice little middle ground where that's quite cool. So straight away, just a basic teal and orange look. You can turn on the node like I mentioned earlier. So if you was just editing on one node in particular, and I just did that grade there, you couldn't see what it was doing before and after. But because we're using nodes and this grade is on the third node, if you actually hover over the button here, number 3, and you actually click it, you can see what literally the grade is doing to this image. It's not affecting the exposure, it's only seeing what the grade is. So if I think, oh, that's a little bit too warm, I might want to go down to the offset and bring it a little bit to the blue, for example. Maybe I want to add a little bit of green to the gamma, go for something like this. And let's see what that's doing. So that's the exposure before, and then I'll turn it back on, and that is my grade. Let's say I'm happy with that. I'll now move on to the next clip. Well, I don't do that whole process all over again because this is the same scene. All I do is click on this clip, and then I right click on the clip that we just color graded, and I click apply grade. That exact grade now has been applied to this shot. Now, obviously, I personally think this is a little bit too green and it's a little bit too bright. So that's when I'll just go into the exposure, and then maybe I'll bring down the gain, and maybe I'll bring down the midtones, and then I go back into my grade here, and I actually think it's a bit too green. So we added the green to the midtones earlier. I just double click that, reset that, maybe bring the blues out a little bit more, go a little bit more warm. That matches not too badly, to be fair. That's basically what I do, and I try and match it as best as I can between the two. And if I actually go into the next clip, I'll then right click on that grade, apply the grade. Obviously, this is completely dark compared to the other one. So this is when I go into the exposure, I'll bring the lift up, and then I might want to bring up the highlights or the midtones, but this is not as warm as I would like it to be. So I'm gonna go back into the grade, and I'm gonna actually take off the blues here, take out the greens, and then I'm gonna just give the gain a ton of warmth. I'm pretty happy with that. I think that looks quite nice. This is exactly what I've done to create my cinematic LUT pack, which I will leave. It should be tagged in this video, and I will leave the link in the description below as well. I made 11 cinematic grades. You can get some really nice, cool looks. If you want to go for a really cold look rather than a warm look, you can go down and add some nice blues to the highlights. Now that looks like a completely different tone, completely different vibe. And that's what I love about cinematic color grading in DaVinci Resolve. So if you are interested in purchasing that pack, I will leave a link in the description below for you to go purchase at my website. It will really help me out, and I really will appreciate it. If I actually go here, for example, this is just what I've done. So I've Rec 709, this one was shot on the Canon R7. So instead of C-Log 2, I've got it on C-Log 3. And I literally done my exposure change. I wanted to make them a little bit silhouetted. And then I added my grade, which was this nice warm grade. Simple, done, looks really nice. The same with this shot. That's the exposure, that's the grade. It matches quite nicely to the other one. So now if you wanted to go that little bit of extra mile and add some more nodes into there, if you want to get a little bit more deep in there, well, I've got something here to show you. So this was a little advert that I've done for my dad's gardening business. And this is, like I said, straight from C-Log 3 into Rec 709 after putting into DaVinci Wide Gamut. And I've got 5 nodes this time instead of 4. So what is the extra node that I've actually done in this one? So the second node, again, is the exposure, like I showed you earlier. The third one is the grade, so I've added a little bit of warmth, added a little bit of saturation, but normally on the other ones, like I said, I was happy with them, I left it on them and I moved on. But for example, with this shot, what I like to do as well, especially with skin tones, as you can see, my dad's a little bit red on the nose, but this person here is quite red. Now, he is naturally quite red anyway, so I don't want to take out too much of the reds because otherwise it will start to look a bit weird and it will start falling apart. But for my liking, and as you can see on this vector scope, this is the skin tone line down here. And if you actually hover over on his cheek here, we're quite far over from the skin tone line and we're quite in a lot of reds. The same as my dad, he's quite over there as well. This side's fine and up here is quite not too bad, but this is what the fourth node is all about. And if I actually turn this on now, as you can see, it just brings down them reds and it brings it closer to the skin tone line. Like I said, I don't want to go too far on this because it starts to fall apart. And like I said, he's quite naturally red as it is anyway. So it's just doing that little bit of extra, the before and after, just to make it a little bit more natural and less red on his face. And as simple as what I've done this, I've actually gone into the curves down here and I've gone into the hue versus hue. I've actually tapped on the skin of his face here, and then I've literally just brought down the hue, as you can see, just down slightly, because if I start bringing it down too much, as you can see there, his face starts going green and it's only on that part. Obviously, I'm not going to do that. So it's just a little bit. The same with these reds on this right-hand side, just to bring down the red, but it's not just the hue versus the hue. You can actually do hue versus saturation. Again, you click on that and you've actually brought down the saturation, and that does quite a lot to his skin. You have got to be careful though, because some people have quite red lips, which is more natural. So you don't want to go too far on it. And if you've got to notice things like this, because if you start bringing down the reds and it looks natural on the skin, well, they might not have any like color on their lips and it might look a little bit strange. So don't go too much with it and don't go too crazy. Look at your vector scope, try and get it as close to the skin tone line as you can. And if you can't, don't go too far, because I'm sure it'll be fine. But that's basically what I do like to do as well. Same for this clip as well. We've got the exposure, we've got the grade, and then we've got the skin tones to bring down the reds in their face, just to make it a little bit more natural and a little bit closer to that skin tone line. So that's again why nodes are so good in DaVinci Resolve, because if we just edited all of that on one node, you're not going to see the impact of, for example, this skin tone line. You're not going to see how it's affecting it, because it affects the whole image. If you want to go that extra one step further to add to your simple node tree, is you add another one, which is option S on the right, and this is where you can add some masks. So for example, if this pink up here is a little bit too bright, you can go in, you can create a circular mask, you can bring this up here, you can feather it out a little bit, and let's just say it's a little bit too pink, so you want to bring the saturation down to 40. Well, now that is just not as in your face, and before and after, that is just affecting that. It's not affecting the whole image, and it's so simple as just doing that, basically. Another way, if you want to add a mask, for example, is you just add another one, you go back into the masks. Let's say you just want to feather it out, but you want the two subjects here to stand out a little bit from the background. So you go down here and then you go back to the lift. Let's just say you bring the overall exposure down, and then if you actually press this one to invert the mask, let's just say you wanted it like that, and now the background has gone darker, so it just gives your subjects just that little bit extra pop. So this is another example from the same video where it was actually the interview with my dad this time, and as you can see, that's very bright, but we've done number 2, which is the exposure change, and then we've got, I'll show you 3 in a minute, we've got 4, which is the grade, and again, like I said, if you go to the vector scope down here, his face, it's not showing it for some reason on this one, but basically you can tell his face is definitely not on the skin tone line. So I added that 5th node where it just brings it down a little bit. That's probably a little bit too much. So I'll go back in here now and change the hue so it's not too greeny, because you want to add a little bit of red. Probably something like that looks a little bit more natural. As you can see, that's what it was like before. That's a bit too much. Sometimes it can go a little bit too fake, but let's just leave it like that for now. But also adding another mask in this. So for this video, I actually, because we was outside, we tried to add a little bit of negative fill, but it was just not, like, it didn't really do anything. So I literally simply came in here and I added a shadow onto my dad's face. It's not perfect, but it does something. And I literally done this by masking it like this, feathering it out a little bit, and then using the tracker window to actually track his face to add a shadow onto the side of his face. And it just adds a little bit more pop, a little bit more 3 dimension, and it just adds that little bit of depth basically into the image. That's what I love about these nodes, and that's the best way to get cinematic color grading in DaVinci Resolve. So if you did find this helpful, please hit that subscribe button. It will really help me out. Hit that like button as well. And if you enjoyed this video, you might like this video up here next. So I'll see you guys on the next one. Thank you very much for watching.